Hello, my name is Ari Redboard. I am head of legal and government affairs at TRM Labs, the leading provider of cryptocurrency fraud detection and anti-money laundering software. Welcome to TRM Talks. TRM Talks is a monthly discussion with policymakers and business leaders in the cryptocurrency space. It's everyone's favorite time of year, tax season. The IRS for years has been the tip of the spear for financial fraud investigations. But in 2020, the IRS doubled down, creating the Office of Fraud Enforcement, focused on rooting out tax evasion, abusive tax avoidance scams, and other malicious activity, including the use of cryptocurrency to facilitate financial fraud. The OFE, part of IRS's Small Business Self-Employed Division, is leading the charge in holding fraudsters, tax cheats, scammers, and money launderers accountable. Today, TRM talks to Eric Hylton, IRS Commissioner of the Small Business Self-Employed Division, and Carolyn Schenck, IRS National Fraud Counsel, on how they are leveraging their financial expertise across the IRS and around the world to combat cryptocurrency-related fraud. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Thank you.
Eric, before we dive into the amazing work your team is doing, in the cryptocurrency space and elsewhere, I know folks would love to hear about your journey to your current role as commissioner of the small business unit. You spent a long time on the criminal side, which I love because you sort of bring that experience to your current position. Can you talk sort of a little bit about your journey through the IRS?
No, sure. Thanks. All right. Well, first, before I jump into that, you're right. Now is the time. It's tax season. So I want to remind everyone out there, filing season has started. So, but no, I appreciate it. Just appreciate TRM, giving us an opportunity to share about some of the initiatives that we have within the IRS as well as small business. But, as far as my background, it's been a fabulous career, my friend. It has been I've been with the organization 30 years, 26 years in CI, and have had the opportunity to kind of crisscross the globe and talk to tax administrators all over the world about some of the really major compliance issues that we have, from tax evasion, kleptocracy, terrorist financing, narcotics-related money laundering, other financial crimes. And now we're here talking about cryptocurrency. And, a lot of folks like to want to say that this is an emerging area, but I say it's emerged. It is here. If you look at the market capitalization of cryptocurrency, it has emerged. But, as far as my career, I've had an opportunity to oversee major tax investigations, oversee narcotics, and I was in charge of our narcotics and counterterrorism office. One of the roles that I really treasure, though, was I was the executive director for our international operations. And so at that time was also the chair for OECD's task force on tax crimes and other crimes. So really had an opportunity to engage so many individuals, which allowed me to use a lot of those touch points to be the commissioner of SBSC and bring a balance to SBSC. For some that are not aware, SBSC has a huge portfolio. We touch 57 million taxpayers, small businesses under $10 million, or corporations under 10 million, excise tax, employment tax, all of collection, Bank Secrecy Act. And so it's just a huge portfolio there. And so it's so important. But one thing that I really think that I bring to SBSC and based on my experience in CI is using communications as a force multiplier and using this platforms like this to be able to kind of share our message and really get out there, whether it's through articles, podcasts, speaking engagements, to really kind of amplify our message, because we do have a great story to tell. So we appreciate TRM giving us the opportunity.
No, for sure. I think we were just saying a minute ago, you're a startup. You really are. And you are out there sort of, pushing a really important message, sort of in the fraud space. One thing that I thought was really so perfect, having spent most of my career in the criminal side, they obviously brought you in to head this up with a very, for very good reason.
Mhm.
And when you stood up the Office of Fraud Enforcement, obviously you're bringing sort of your criminal expertise and background to that. Can you talk a little bit about that office and the work you're doing there?
Yeah, it's exciting. When the commissioner appointed me to this position, I walked in the office and I said, Commissioner, I'm a mad scientist. I'm a mad scientist. So I have this idea. I want to, amplify this Office of Fraud Enforcement and really bring a strong focus to fraud across the organization. And so we elevated that office to a point to whereas not only internally, but externally. And one of the things that I shared when I was in CI and here in SBSC, yes, we're here to protect the integrity of the tax administration, either protecting against fraud, different things of that nature. But we're also here to protect the integrity of the US financial system and also globally, because fraud erodes at any financial system. So you have to really kind of address it fully. So bringing in this Office of Fraud Enforcement has been so important for us and really looking at all the major aspects of non-compliance issues. And so we started in March of 2020. And then we have, Carolyn Schenck that's here with us as well as the National Fraud Counsel. And we hired Damon Rowe, who's an experienced CI agent to come in. And I talk about Carolyn and Damon all the time because during COVID, they could have easily got into a Pinto and said, okay, let's get into where we are. They jumped into a Porsche and they hit the ground running, and they're hitting issues like COVID fraud, employment tax, collection issues, cryptocurrency, all different major areas of non-compliance, non-filers. It has just truly been amazing, and really asking law enforcement agencies and other government agencies reach out to Office of Fraud Enforcement if you have leads.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I will say that so we're starting a little bit of a new tradition, I think, now at TRM Talks, and that is I'm only inviting guys with really good looking heads on the show now. So we had Mike Mosier last month. Now we have you in here. I think there's a look I'm going for, and I'm loving the new tradition. Absolutely,
I'm on that train there. All
right. Carolyn, so talk a little bit about your position. Eric just mentioned your role in all of this. If you can sort of walk folks through sort of how you plug in to the Office of Fraud Enforcement and just sort of writ large across the agency.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ari. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate the opportunity, and I hope that this finds everyone safe and sound during this pretty chaotic period of time. I thank you also for having me on because I realize I do have hair, so I think that puts me as a unique guest. And also, as one of Eric's lawyers, I will note that he is not a mad scientist. So I'm just going to make that clarification out. But in terms of the National Fraud Counsel position and how I fit into the Office of Fraud Enforcement and to the rest of the IRS's mission here in terms of eradicating fraud is really one of partnership. The IRS has had a counsel presence all across the board, of course, since the stand up of the service. But this position is uniquely situated in that we work, shoulder to shoulder with the Office of Fraud Enforcement and Damon Rowe as the fraud director. But also we have stood up a team of about 100 or so strong litigators around the country, and they are paired up with revenue agent and revenue officer groups as they are looking at aspects of all cases across the board and whether or not there is any indicia of fraud. So our team comes into play when there are indicators of fraud, and to really help the agents and the officers up front in determining whether or not it rises to a level of a civil fraud penalty and stays on the civil side, or if it goes over to Eric's former stomping grounds, which is CI for a criminal referral, and of course yours, as a former prosecutor. So that's kind of how we fit in. So kind of a lot of bread and butter things that we're doing with the agents, evaluating evidence up front to see if we meet the standards, helping out with interviews, tricky legal positions, working with, kind of some more basic things like bank deposit analysis, but also looking at penalty development, helping with whistleblowers, just kind of a lot of those things on the front end, because I think especially in the area of crypto, it's as Eric mentioned, and I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, this issue and area has obviously emerged. I mean, we are no longer in an emerging situation. So we have cases, and I know that we'll probably talk about this a little bit later, where we are going down the path of litigating these things. And so those concepts need to be sought out and really fleshed out kind of up front in order for us to effectively protect the fisc, which is really what we're doing here. So that's kind of how we fit into the overall scene.
Yeah, it's awesome work. I mean, one thing I loved about your characterizations, both of you, is I feel like it's so much of what we do, right? I went to TRM because I could go somewhere and still continue the mission that you guys are on, and that is protecting the financial system from fraud and other illicit activity. Yeah, turning to crypto, maybe sort of talk about a little bit of your experience so far in your current role, and really, feel free to sort of talk across the IRS in terms of how what you've seen in the crypto space and how you guys are starting to think about it.
So no, I appreciate it. It's a great question there, Ari. I mean, as far as crypto, IRS has been actively engaged across all the organizations, and I will say in my 30 years, I've never seen this level of cooperation, with the different business divisions, and so we have Carolyn with National Fraud Counsel, also large business and international, very actively involved with them. Tax exempt and government entities. Yes, you do have some of those nonprofits who are involved in cryptocurrency as well. And obviously my good colleagues from over in CI. And it's just so important for us to kind of think about it from an enterprise-wide standpoint, and how do we address it and use all the tools in our toolbox. And to try, as you think about, cryptocurrency is such an amazing topic. It's fascinating because when you think of how the different treatment streams or different treatment areas, whether it's property, it's currency, derivative, commodity, security, different things of that nature. So, you have to kind of interact even beyond the IRS as well. But the IRS, to try to get a peek into that, in 2019, we put a question on the 1040, and we kind of tweaked it a little bit this year. So on the 1040 Schedule 1, anytime during 2020, did you receive, sell, send, exchange, or otherwise acquire any financial interest in any virtual currency? And so that question is there, as well as we expanded it to some of the other returns as well, and just really getting a more so of an insight into that. But I think what, our agents, and I kind of look at it from an overall compliance presence standpoint. So we have a number of things that I want to share because these things lead up to potential fraud. So we have a program called the automatic underreporting. And so you get information returns from virtual currency exchangers. We match that up against the return. And so should it be there? Yes, it should be there, right? So that could lead to a potential fraud case. But then we're establishing this Bank Secrecy Act and virtual currency practice network, in which we're having quarterly training sessions. And one of the things about being in leadership is that you don't get a chance to participate in all these great things that are going on. So some of the training that we have, basis tracking, gain computation, blockchain tracing, altcoins and tokens, dark web activities, de-anonymization of support, and fraud development, really to just enhance our service-wide fluency as it relates to digital assets. And from a BSA perspective, as well as from a tax perspective. And so it's fascinating as we're really trying to develop this whole aspect of non-compliance. And we're looking at a new initiative, and we're almost there, called Operation Hidden Treasure, in which we're collecting a diverse of ongoing efforts. This is another OFE, Carolyn and Damon, project that just come out of there. It's like, every time I meet with them, they have a new idea. And I'm like, let's.
The mad scientist.
One of the great things about, the unfortunate thing about being a leader, you can't participate in all of these great, training exercises and different things of that nature. So one of the aspects that we're looking at is that we developed this virtual currency practice network. And so that practice network and training that we have, we're having basis training, gain computation, blockchain tracing, altcoins and tokens, dark web activity, de-anonymization support, and fraud development. Overall, to just enhance service-wide fluency as it relates to digital assets. All of these things are so critically important to kind of demystify this new invention, this new innovation that is out there. So it's, from a Title 26 and Title 31 perspective. So I don't know, Carolyn, if you want to add some more, because we're also starting this new operation in which we're collecting a diverse set of ongoing, and it's something that OFE has looking at just futuristic technology with classic investigative techniques to look at wealthy individuals who are unreporting their income. So it's just fascinating. I don't know, Carol, if you want to add some more to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing how much you guys and how deeply you guys are thinking about crypto right now, and really, I think, gaining tremendous expertise. I mean, Carolyn, specifically sort of on the legal side, when you're talking to folks and sort of providing legal opinions and expertise, when are you thinking about crypto, and how are you thinking about crypto?
I think the answer is pretty much all the time. I think, as Eric kind of kicked off our presentation today and our discussion, it's everywhere. I mean, the market cap is huge as people are engaging in these transactions. We put it on the 2019 return on Schedule 1, as Eric noted, and then it rose to the face of the 2020 return because of the importance that crypto is playing, and really a lot of day-to-day activities and transactions of most sophisticated Americans to, I think, individuals that are operating on a very micro level. So there is a lot of activity there. So in terms of how it comes into counsel's point of view or counsel's perspective, as we partner with compliance officers around the country, these types of concepts are what we are introducing to a lot of the investigative streams. So I know Damon mentioned treatment streams. I mean, there's a couple different ways that we are dealing with crypto, either from an auditing perspective, or we are touching taxpayers through various information returns like the automated reporter program, or we are sending out education letters to taxpayers, inviting them to come into compliance. And so I think working with Eric and other folks on the IRS side and figuring out what is the appropriate treatment stream if we do have unreported crypto assets. So I think that's one of them. Another thing that we've been doing is really working with our national office folks and our experts in terms of regulation writing and figuring out, where are the gaps in the law, and how do we find that balance between a proper and a fairly balanced regulation. So we are not, squashing any innovation or maybe an area of industry, but at the same time, we are protecting our financial system, which is really what that balance, I think, is. Some of the other things too is just in terms of how we are assisting Eric's teams, is that we're making sure that there are open lines of communication. I think we are in a very unique situation because this is such an interesting issue and a unique issue that it's really brought in a number of different areas of the IRS in terms of business units across the board. So communicating, keeping those open lines of communication. Also, Eric mentioned Title 31. IRS has certain enforcement initiatives and activities with respect to various sections of Title 31. And one of those relates to reports of foreign financial accounts, or called an FBAR. And so one of the things that FinCEN just released, actually was the end of the year, was that they were considering proposing an amendment to the BSA, the Bank Secrecy Act regulations, to require reporting of offshore accounts holding virtual currency on an FBAR form. So, new legislation, figuring out the correct path forward, not only from a regulatory standpoint, but also from a litigation perspective. Those are some of the other areas that I think our legal folks and my team and myself, as far as the National Fraud Counsel, have contributed to in this area.
Yeah, I know that's fantastic. You both have referenced sort of the IRS, the question, the crypto question now on the 1040. And it's really, when I think about the things that have happened in government in relationship to cryptocurrency over the last, really ever, that has certainly been a huge sea change in the way I think crypto, mainstream adoption, and how important it is to report, activity. Which is really,
just kind of one point on that, IRS has been engaged in crypto investigations for a long time. I think Eric can certainly speak to to CI's involvement, which I think really kind of is where the IRS started as far as this is concerned. The civil folks kind of got into the scene with the John Doe summons to Coinbase in 2016. I think that's where kind of the civil folks came into play in terms of looking at this from
Carolyn, let me stop you there because that was also a really important moment, I think, for the IRS and vis-a-vis crypto. Can you just sort of talk just briefly about the Coinbase case?
Sure. A John Doe summons is one of the tools in the IRS's arsenal in terms of enforcement, and it's called a John Doe summons because we don't know the taxpayer's identity that we are seeking, but we have basically a group of taxpayers that are engaging in an activity that we feel may have a reasonable likelihood of tax noncompliance. And so we identified a group of individuals in a certain period of time, so certain tax years. And we issued a John Doe summons after getting permission from the district court to serve it on Coinbase. So that was served in 2016. Coinbase did not comply with the summons, so we moved for enforcement of the summons. Now, again, a summons is just a tool of the IRS's, and the John Doe is a unique one. And then from there, it kind of played out. There was a tremendous amount of media coverage. There was a lot of amicus briefs filed. It was, a pretty extensive litigation, but then ultimately the court ordered Coinbase to comply. So that's kind of the case there. So, the John Doe summons is a very effective tool for the service, and we have used it extensively since probably 2000 in the area of offshore. I think we've issued a total of 181 John Doe summonses in the area of offshore enforcement as well. The Coinbase one was the first that we did in the area of virtual currency. And I would expect some more as far as that's concerned.
Sure. I mean, the whole industry and really the legal, landscape is it's nascent in really early stages. I read yesterday that there's still litigation involving the Coinbase subpoena still ongoing.
Yes, there's a case that's filed. Yeah, I think it was covered in the press.
Which is extraordinary. Yeah, I mean, it's also we'll all see. I think how this all shakes out, but it's just a very, very interesting moment.
But the one thing I do want to say is that just because an entity receives a John Doe summons, it doesn't mean that the IRS thinks that entity is doing something wrong. It's really more the potential class of customers or the class of taxpayers that we feel are somehow serviced by that entity or affected by that entity. So so folks shouldn't read into the fact that, company A received a John Doe summons. It's not like we think company A is doing something wrong. So
it's a very important distinction. And I think that gets lost quite frequently. Eric, sort of back to you. You are laser focused on fraud enforcement. I mean, that, and I know that you've brought your criminal expertise to it. I think that it would be helpful to sort of understand the buckets that you are specifically focused on when it comes to fraud, what you're seeing, obviously, particularly in the crypto space, but feel free to go beyond that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are as a laser focus, but I also say I like to balance it because whenever you have innovation and, there's, as I expressed earlier, just that mystique associated with this new innovation. So within SBSC, we're here and our mission is to assist and help taxpayers understand their tax obligation, but we're also here to help them meet their tax obligation. So I can still kind of held that scales of justice there that I'm used to from the criminal side. But it's important. And one of the important areas that we're looking at is we have a really thriving Bank Secrecy Act program. And just to ensure compliance with the rules and regulations of the Bank Secrecy Act, for example, virtual currency exchanges are money service businesses. And, they must register with our partners at U.S. Treasury, Financial Crimes Network, Enforcement Network, FinCEN. So in addition to that, those MSBs have to report currency transactions in excess of 10,000. So we have a really robust program as it relates to virtual currency exchangers because we need to ensure that we're kind of moving forward. But a unique area in that are these cryptocurrency kiosks, and which, if I would say my CI spidey sense goes off a little bit, when you start thinking about some of these kiosks or ATMs as people like to try to kind of describe them. But that is, I think, an important area for us to kind of pay some attention to because, and there are thousands of them, they're, domestically as well as internationally. But you start looking at the percentage as to what is to withdraw or transact, I should say. I've seen percentages as low as 7 or 8%, but I've seen them as high as almost 20%. And you start thinking about, I used to be in charge of money laundering. And so there is that possibility of that rate, when years ago, there was a money laundering rate when I was, whether you want to launder funds in in South America or Europe. Not to say that these kiosks aren't involved in that at all. I want to give that impression. But when you look at those high percentage rates, why would an individual use that for that purpose when you can exchange in other means? So just as an awareness to everyone. So that is an area in which we're doing a significant amount of compliance checks. But as we talk about it, ironically, though, as we go out to some of these exchanges, you still find exchanges who haven't registered with FinCEN as an MSB. Yeah. You still find exchanges that haven't set up preparing and implementing and maintaining a written anti-money laundering program. That's just fundamental. And you still find exchanges that are, failing to file some of the BSA reports, suspicious transaction reports, currency transactions, or maintaining records on certain transactions. So a lot of these areas is important, and I want to kind of get that out there to ensure that we're checking and we're pursuing some of those. So it's important. I don't know, Carolyn, want to add any more to that?
The only thing I would add is that, again, it gets back to the integrity of our financial system. And in order for, groups like Eric's teams and our civil folks to be able to really police and protect, it takes compliance from our market participants. And that is where the kiosk folks come into play and the other folks that should be registering as money services businesses with FinCEN. So no, Eric, I think that's just dead on.
Yeah, I'm not usually one to go in for the plug, but this is exactly why money service businesses and sort of financial institutions need tools like, blockchain intelligence, like TRM, to make sure that they're monitoring their own, platforms to be compliant and sort of also to be on the right side of things, for sure. Carolyn, you got into sort of the John Doe subpoena a little bit. Could you sort of, and I always hate to ask these questions of law enforcement or folks in your world, but could you, to the extent that you can talk about cases, I'd sort of love to hear about examples of the types of cases that you're seeing and the types of cases that you guys are working on.
Sure, I can kind of give you a little bit of maybe a bird's eye view into some of them because these cases are in active litigation. But I say there's obviously two spheres. We've got civil cases as well as criminal cases. From a civil perspective, those are cases where the IRS has not forwarded the case to our criminal investigation unit. So it has gone through the regular kind of Title 26 tax analysis through the IRS, working, most of the cases that we have now in court are through Eric's people in SBSE. And so those are cases where we have information that a taxpayer has underreported or failed to report their virtual currency transactions, and we've made adjustments to their tax returns. And instead of complying, they have sued the government, and we are now in a tax court posture. So in active litigation. So we have about 24 or so of those cases. The way that those cases are set up, they're unreported income cases, and some of them have some penalties in terms of accuracy-related penalties or failure to file penalties. So that's kind of where we are as far as from a civil perspective with an actual like a bread and butter kind of tax case. But then as far as from a criminal perspective, there's, and you see the news, I know Chris has been on, Greg have been on TRM Talks. They've talked about some of the other work that we are doing, that the IRS is doing that's, related to crypto in the space, not necessarily tax focused. But from a tax focused perspective, there have been several criminal cases out there. There is probably the first illegal source income case was filed in Seattle involving some funds that were taken from another entity and then not reported on the income tax return. That case is currently on appeal to the Ninth Circuit. There's another case involving legal source income that was filed in the Southern District of New York recently involving a Pearl token. And there's also a related SEC case. And then there was recently a case filed, or at least unsealed, about 2 weeks ago involving a California private eye who established an entity called Bitcoin with two I's. And it's kind of a basic fraud type case, but that was just unsealed in the Eastern District of New York. So, those are the types of cases we're looking at. Again, civil perspective, kind of bread and butter tax with some penalties as well as some fraud. And then from a criminal perspective, not only fraud, but other kind of precipient crimes, whether it be embezzlement. Obviously we've seen the horrific child exploitation that the IRS uncovered in terms of the Welcome to Video case. So that's kind of what we're seeing.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And actually it's a great jumping off point for my question to Eric. I've been interested, I'm probably most interested in that intersection that you guys live in between fraud and criminal activity. Maybe you can talk a little bit about sort of the way you work with CI, and really not just CI, but sort of across the interagency on the criminal side. As a prosecutor, there were plenty of cases, quite frankly, that we just couldn't meet that beyond a reasonable doubt burden, didn't feel comfortable taking to a jury, but would be a really terrific civil case, very, very strong civil case. How do you, so basically two questions. One, sort of, how do you work across the interagency and with sort of the criminal side? But then also, if you're speaking to those folks, what would you say to them about what you can do with the tools that you have on the cases maybe they can't bring, or or wimpy prosecutors aren't willing to take to court, or something along those lines?
I mean, that is a fantastic question there, all right, because that is one of the main purposes of really amplifying this Office of Fraud Enforcement. And so the first thought or the first piece of advice is to reach out to Damon and Carolyn. And Carolyn's probably like, oh, I don't want any more calls.
We'll give her email out after the show. Yeah.
Right. But no, really, I mean, in my 26 years in law enforcement, there's only a certain amount of cases that's going to go criminal. And so there's so many more that you can look at it from a civil perspective. And as Carolyn mentioned earlier, we can use the tool of civil fraud in our toolbox as well, but also recognizing that you're taxed on all of your worldwide income, whether it's legal or illegal. And so when you're thinking about from a prosecutor perspective, there are some cases in reaching out to us to ensure that this individual that is trying to evade or something of that nature, have some skin in the game in a sense, and how we can kind of move forward with that. So one of the things that I'm looking is, as I expressed, is just really elevating that Office of Fraud Enforcement and reaching across law enforcement agencies as well as other government agencies. One of the things has been we've been pushing a lot, obviously, is COVID-related fraud. So we're working with Small Business Administration on aspects of that, so that we can kind of prevent. So it's kind of revenue protection, in some degree, but also working across all other agencies. And it's one of the reasons why I brought Damien in to kind of work that, because he's used to kind of interacting with law enforcement agencies, U.S. attorneys' offices, and different things of that nature to get some of those leads. But, you have in most of those cases nominee situations. And, we're not afraid of some of these 1-year cases that are out there that we can kind of pursue if it's egregious enough. So, reaching out to the Office of Fraud Enforcement is probably one of the key factors that I would share.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And sort of just building on that a little bit, Carolyn, I know you guys work very closely with the interagency, but really you're working with tax authorities around the world. Can you sort of talk a little bit about your role in that process?
Sure. I think in large part, we are a partner to our civil enforcement folks. So, there are a lot of relationships that we have. I think our treaty relationships are extremely robust. There's obviously the J5, which I would certainly, I'm going to kick to Eric to talk about in a second. There's that opportunity for us to work with our treaty partners. But yeah, so in terms of from a global perspective, look, tax evasion is not just a U.S. problem, right? I mean, it is not. And so when we come across pieces of information, or whether it be small or huge bodies, we follow our appropriate protocols and we give that to our treaty partners in the form of a spontaneous exchange. And we are the happy recipient of that as well. And we have received that in the area of, in a lot of different areas, I'll kind of leave it at that. But one thing that I just want to follow up on what Eric hit on, we're just, the whole concept of the prosecutorial prerogative on cases. Because, sometimes I think in a traditional sense, a 1-year tax case is probably not the best criminal case to bring forward. It's not to say it hasn't been done, it hasn't been won, but the evidence of pattern is something that prosecutors, as well as our civil trial attorneys, look for. And if you've got a 1-year case, it's kind of hard. But in the area of crypto, I think we are looking beyond that, and you'll see some activity where it is just a single year case. And as Eric noted, if it doesn't rise to the level because of that prosecutorial, potential prerogative, or because of some of these other issues, like maybe we have strong nominee issues, or maybe there are, maybe it's a jury appeal thing, or maybe it's a little too complicated to explain, or something like that. The avenue there is civil fraud for sure. So I just wanted to echo Eric's point.
No, that's fantastic. And Eric, I think you may have wanted to build on the international relationships piece of this as well.
Yeah, so several years, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when I was in charge of OECD's task force on tax crimes, really we were addressing a lot of non-compliance issues and really looking at building on typologies, methodologies to help developing countries address many of these issues. And as we were working through it, we started thinking about, okay, we need to operationalize this. So when Don Ford became the chief of CI and I was the deputy chief of CI, we said, well, let's take this to the next level. And so we created the J5, and this is the Joint Chiefs of Global Tax Enforcement, and just kind of working with a few small partners on addressing some of the, the real critical issues. And they just met this past week, and it's great. And they had what we call a challenge, in which they bring together some of the strong subject matter experts to, figure out some of the software issues or tax compliance issues. And they did one just on cryptocurrency just recently. And it's fascinating how you bring all of this expertise together. And there's been great cases that have come across around, because as you know, crooks are borderless. So you will see that they are working across the world. And I'm sending a message, just like I'm quite sure my CI folks would say, beware, we're coming, and we're working and we're collaborating through OECD, through the J5, and doing work with a number of international bodies. So it's great.
Building on that question, Carolyn, I know you get this common refrain, hey, if the IRS or the US overregulates in the crypto space, we're going to take our exchange or we're going to move offshore. Obviously, sort of Eric just went through some of the relationships that you have, but can you sort of talk a little bit about that threat and how you guys sort of see that playing out?
Sure, I agree. It is definitely something that we have heard, but I would caution any entity that is considering a pivot like that, and that's not a solution. It's not a good business model. You're not going to escape, I think, the United States government by going offshore. I mean, look, as Eric noted, with our partners in FinCEN, there are certain requirements for money service businesses. And one of those is that you have to provide an agent for service of process if you decide to avail yourself of the US system. And so what that means is that the IRS, like any other agency, would still have the ability to serve a summons or a subpoena on you because of the fact that you're registered here. Also, we have a multitude of treaty partners. And so we are able, through the criminal side, to issue an MLAT, or we are able to issue a treaty request to ask our friends in our other countries, hey, we need these records from an entity that's domiciled in your jurisdiction. Can you help us out here? So, so that's one thing in terms of avenues of pursuit. The second thing is that, from what we're seeing, that a lot of customers appear to like the stability that they feel being availed of the U.S. system gives them. So, that's something that I think an entity should take into consideration, and whether or not it's in their best interest to turn around and go offshore because they are concerned with overreaching regulation. The other thing, I think, if they are considering going offshore, it's probably because their client base is maybe not the most noble or U.S. legally compliant, whether from a tax perspective or just from a basic a legal perspective. So I mean that there's some real hard things I think that an entity needs to think about because they are not going to get out of our reach is probably the bottom line.
I hear you loud and clear. I am assuming that everyone else does too. That was great, Carolyn. So, look, one thing we've been doing at TRM Talks is I sort of ask you guys to bust out your crystal balls. Eric, what do you see sort of down the road, 6 months, a year from now, as sort of the really big issues that you're focused on, crypto or otherwise, really in the fraud enforcement world?
Yeah, here again, another great question there, Ari. I mean, as we kind of think about it, and obviously, COVID has amplified a lot of other areas, and so you're going to have COVID-related fraud associated with it because as we go around PPP and so you're going to have those issues. But also, as you kind of think about the changing dynamics of the world, and as we look at in today's high-tech financial world, there's increasingly more opportunities for fraudsters to take advantage of people and their bank accounts. That is something that we have to kind of think about as well, because there's individuals here, and there are a lot of individuals who are working from home, and they're doing a lot more e-commerce and different transactions that are associated with that. You're finding a lot of companies that are standing up and saying, well, we can provide this service or that service. So you're going to have a lot of fraudulent activity to that. And then there's also individuals who are providing services. I've seen some services in which maybe you ask a question, you get paid a certain amount, and then how they get paid, maybe through some mechanism, internet mechanism, in which they're not reporting that. So very similar to as we try to get a little bit more transparency into the gig economy. So, you see a lot of, I would say, COVID-related amplified fraud that is in play. So
yeah, it's a great point. I mean, this is the event of our lifetime, really, and unfortunately, broad opportunity of a lifetime too.
Exactly.
And I can imagine there'll be plenty of work for a very, very long time in that space. Carolyn, what are your thoughts on that? Busting out the crystal ball.
Sure. Just following up on what Eric said in terms of leveling the playing field. I mean, obviously we are in unprecedented times of online and various cyber activity. And I think removing bad actors really promotes less risk and fosters a secure platform for honest people to conduct transactions on a day-to-day basis with confidence. There are tens of millions of people who every year take significant steps to pull together their papers, pull together their receipts, to hire a good tax return preparer, and to file the best income tax return they can. And so that is really who we are seeking to protect, because that is who really hurts from this kind of, these sort of bad actors out there that we've talked about today. So I think that's something that the IRS is looking at to continue to do. And that's really what we're striving to do is really to protect those individuals.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you. I mean, Bitcoin is surging this week. So if you sell, it is a taxable event. That work for you guys? That's right. All right. Report it. No, guys, thank you so much for joining TRM Talks today. It was a really fantastic conversation in an area that I think people are very, very interested in and frankly need to know more about. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
TRM Talks is brought to you by TRM Labs, the leading provider of cryptocurrency fraud detection and anti-money laundering software. Looking forward to another terrific discussion next month with movers and shakers from the world of cryptocurrency. Until then, thank you to all of you who work so hard every day to keep us safe.